The U.S. State Department is warning Americans not to travel to Belarus due to the risk of detention. This comes after the country forced a passenger plane flying over its airspace to land last weekend. Authorities arrested a dissident Belarusian journalist who was on board. Now, some European countries are now barring Belarus's planes from flying through their airspace, but Moscow is backing the country's dictator, Alexander Lukashenko. Christina Ruffini is following this story for us. Christina, thanks for joining us. So, in the wake of all of this, Air France canceled a flight from Paris to Moscow yesterday after Russia did not approve a flight path around Belarus. So we know that Vladimir Putin and Lukashenko have a relationship. Can you explain to our viewers what the relationship is like between the two countries?
It's complicated, I think, is what they would put on their dating app. Look, Lukashenko refers to himself as the last dictator in Europe, right? He's this very Soviet figure. He's a strong man. I actually was in the room with him about a year or two ago when Secretary Pompeo visited. And the reason that's important is because Lukashenko has kind of played both sides of this aisle, right? He'll cozy up to Europe or the West when he thought it benefited his country, or he'll run back to Putin when he thought it benefited his country. So for years and years and years, he's played this game of, oh, maybe I'll go with the West, maybe I'll go with Russia, maybe I'll, and it's benefited him until recently, until there were these elections, and then there were these protests, and then what he thought was very secure claim on power in his country began to falter. So now he's having a much tenser relationship with the West, and that's pushed him a little bit more towards Russia. But look, Russia has its own problems, and even though they would much rather have a neighbor, someone on their border like Belarus, be more loyal to Moscow, they also don't want to be responsible financially for Belarus if all these other countries start to sanction them, if flights can't come in and out of the country. They don't need a client state that doesn't give them anything in return. So what's going to be interesting is that even though Putin has backed Lukashenko and they have this relationship, and really he's pretty much his last standing friend in Europe at the moment, it's not entirely clear whether Moscow wants to take on the burden of Lukashenko and his problems and his crackdown on dissidents and this absolutely insane thing he just did with this plane. So Moscow has been tentatively supportive, but more passively supportive. We haven't really seen them come out. And I think that's because they're waiting, they're sitting back to see how this plays out because they're not exactly sure what they want to do yet.
Very interesting. President Biden has said that his administration is considering imposing sanctions on Belarus in response to the forced landing of this plane. We also know that the president is expected to meet with Russian leader Vladimir Putin next month. How is all of this likely to impact the relationship between the U.S. and Russia? Perhaps that's part of the reason why Putin is sort of playing this rather low-key.
Right. I mean, I think on the face of it, the U.S. can't be showing up to a summit with the Russian president if this dissident has just been executed and Putin didn't intervene, or the assumption is Putin could have stopped it, or Putin has a tacit approval of it. So the optics of it are very complicated, and it's not entirely clear whether or not, this is not Russia, right? It is its own country, but because of its close relationship with Moscow, Putin is going to be tied to whatever happens there. So it's not entirely, the U.S. hasn't said really anything yet about how this could affect the summit, how it's impacting relations with Russia. But as you're seeing with these overflights, there is, we've got your back, you're a former Soviet state, like, you're one of us and we'll stand up for you. What's going to be really interesting is seeing the fallout because, COVID is breaking, these travel restrictions are breaking down a little bit as COVID improves in some places, although it's not great in Eastern Europe right now. But if you can't fly in and out of Belarus, if you can't get a commercial air flight, if businesses and packages and all those other things can't get into that country more easily, it's going to really affect the economy and it's going to start to implode. And that's when you're going to have to see either Moscow really getting involved, which could be a big problem for U.S.-Russian relations, or you could see Moscow step back a bit and say, you know what, they're on their own. We want to have a better working relationship with the U.S. I don't really see that latter thing happening, but it's all going to depend on how bad it gets in Belarus and how significantly Russia steps in or gets involved.
Well, to that point, Belarus's national airline said today that it's been forced to cancel flights to 8 countries. And so, you talked about the impact on the relationships when it comes to the leaders, but what about the impact on people? And I would think if, it becomes even more uncomfortable for people living in Belarus, that would only bolster the ranks of those who are opposed to Lukashenko.
I mean, that's the problem with these kind of moves. There's not much other countries can do, right? They're not going to invade Belarus because they took this plane and arrested this dissident. So there are things like sanctions and, canceling flights and kind of isolating this country. Those are the next steps. But as we've seen, anytime this plays out around the world, usually the people who get hurt by these measures, unfortunately, are the citizens of that country, right? In order to hurt the government, in order to hurt the people in power, the citizens always end up being collateral damage. And we've seen that with sanctions in other countries. And if they were to cut off air travel, it's already hard to get in and out of Belarus, if you're a Belarusian citizen. So it's not going to be good, especially for people who are in the sights of the government, who are protesters, who are dissidents, who are journalists. If they need to make a quick escape and there are no airlines to get them out of the country, that's going to be a problem. And it's going to just make life even harder for people who are still fighting a contested election and still trying to oust Lukashenko. And the momentum was strong, but it's kind of stagnated and it doesn't seem like he's going anywhere. So this is just going to make life harder for a lot of people, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely. Christina Ruffini, thank you so much.